My husband died 6 weeks ago, and for the first 6 weeks, I did everything right. I made the phone calls. I signed the forms. I sat through the service with dry eyes because I had learned a long time ago that falling apart in public only gave people permission to handle you. His name was Daniel Merritt. We had been married for 4 years. He was a software developer who worked from home and made me laugh every single morning without trying. He died on a Tuesday in March when a truck ran a red light on Route 9, and the world kept moving anyway, the way it always does, indifferent and steady, regardless of who is gone. 6 weeks after the funeral, I was sitting across from his family's estate attorney in a small office that smelled like old carpet and printer toner. His older brother Ryan sat 2 chairs to my left, leaning back with his arms crossed the way he always did when he thought a room belonged to him. Daniel's younger sister Jade sat near the door, scrolling her phone with her thumbnail between her teeth, trying to look like she wasn't listening. The attorney, a thin man named Gerald Cross, set a manila folder on the desk and pushed it toward me. "Your husband left 2 documents for you specifically," he said. "One is a standard letter, the other is a key." He opened a small cardboard box. Inside, on a square of foam, sat a single key on a plain steel ring. No label, no tag. Ryan uncrossed his arms. "What does the key open?" Gerald looked at him briefly, then back at me. That information was left for Casey alone. Ryan's jaw shifted. He had Daniel's dark eyes but none of Daniel's warmth. He was 2 years older, sharper, and had spent most of our marriage treating me like a temporary inconvenience he was waiting to outlast. I picked up the key. It was heavier than it looked. The letter was short, 4 paragraphs in Daniel's handwriting, which was messy and a little sideways, the way it always was when he wrote quickly. I read it once without reacting, then folded it and put it in my coat pocket. "Casey, if you're reading this, something happened and I'm sorry I wasn't here to explain it in person. There's a storage unit on the east side of Kellerton, off the industrial road behind the grain elevator, Unit 14. I've had it for 3 years. I never told you because I was still working through what to do with what's inside. You'll understand when you see it. Don't go with Ryan. Don't tell him you're going. Please go before you make any decisions about anything. The code for the lock is your mother's birthday plus the year we got married. I love you. I trust you completely." Gerald cleared his throat. "There's also a property asset listed in the updated will. A 10-year prepaid lease on a commercial storage unit in Kellerton. It transfers to you directly." Ryan sat forward. "A storage unit?" Daniel never mentioned any storage unit. "No," Gerald said, "he didn't." Jade put her phone down for the first time. She was 22 and had always been more curious than careful. She looked at me with something between suspicion and interest. "Casey, do you know what's in it?" "No," I said. That was the truth. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the key in front of me and Daniel's letter open beside it. I work as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm in the city. My job is to find what people hide in numbers. I have spent 7 years learning that the most important information is almost never in the obvious place. Daniel had known that about me. It was part of why the letter made complete sense and no sense at the same time. 3 years. He had kept a storage unit for 3 years without telling me. We had been honest about everything else. Or I had thought we were. I went to Kellerton the next morning before 7. I did not tell Ryan. I did not tell Jade. I followed the directions in my head from Daniel's letter, off the main road, past the grain elevator, onto a gravel stretch lined with corrugated metal buildings. Unit 14 was near the back, padlocked with a combination lock. My mother's birthday was April 3rd. The year we got married was 2 years ago in September. I dialed the numbers in and the lock clicked open. Inside was a 10 by 20 foot space that smelled like cool air and cardboard. The unit was organized the way Daniel organized everything, with quiet precision. Metal shelving ran along both walls. On one side, stacked storage bins were labeled by year. On the other, a folding table held a laptop, a portable hard drive, and a neat row of 3-ring binders. In the center of the table, there was a single sticky note with one line in Daniel's handwriting, "Start with the red binder." Then the laptop. "Password is the name of the place we got engaged plus the number of steps to the top." I stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then I walked in, pulled the door shut behind me, and sat down. The red binder was 2 inches thick. The first tab was labeled Overview in Daniel's handwriting. I opened it. The first page was a timeline starting 3 years ago, running to 2 months before his death. It documented a series of wire transfers routed through a subsidiary LLC connected to his software development company. The amounts were not large individually, 12,000 here, 8,000 there, but the pattern was unmistakable to anyone trained to see it. The money was cycling through shell accounts, cleaned, and landing in a real estate development fund. The real estate development fund was registered to Ryan Merritt. I closed the binder and opened my eyes very slowly. Daniel had not known about this at first. His own notes made that clear. The LLC had been set up using his business identification number without his knowledge. By the time he discovered it, approximately 18 months ago, the total amount cycled through was just over $200,000. He had spent the following year and a half documenting everything quietly, methodically, the way he did with every problem he cared about solving. He never confronted Ryan. His last note in the binder said, "I need more time to understand how far this goes before I say anything. I don't want to destroy everything based on an incomplete picture." He ran out of time on a Tuesday in March. I sat in that storage unit for 2 hours. I went through 4 binders and made my own notes in a small pad I had brought out of habit. By the time I left, I had a clear enough picture to know that what Daniel found was not just a family problem. It was a federal one. I drove home on the back roads with both hands on the wheel, and my brain working the way it does when I find something in an audit that changes the shape of everything. Calm on the outside, completely awake underneath. My phone had 3 missed calls from Ryan by the time I got back. He had also texted Jade, who texted me. "Ryan says he needs to talk to you about the estate. He says there might be some financial issues with Daniel's company that need to be sorted before anything is distributed. He sounds worried. Should we meet?" I put my phone face down on the counter. That evening, Jade came to the house uninvited. She knocked and I let her in because she was 22 years old and had just lost her brother, and I was not going to be the kind of person who locked the door on that. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea I made her. She had Daniel's same way of going quiet when she was trying to figure out what she actually wanted to say. "Ryan thinks there might be a problem with Daniel's business accounts," she said finally. "He says there could be some debts that affect the estate. He said you might not know about them yet. Did he say what kind of debts?" "Something with an LLC. He said he might be able to help manage it if you let him take a look at the company files." I kept my face still. I had years of practice at this. "That's thoughtful of him." Jade looked at me. She was young but not stupid. "You already know something, don't you?" "I'm looking into a few things," I said carefully. "Casey." She set down the mug. "You can tell me." "Not yet," I said. "I need a few more days." She looked hurt by that. She left shortly after, and I stood at the window and watched her car pull out and felt the specific loneliness of knowing something that could damage a person's family and not being ready to say it out loud yet. The next morning I called a contact of mine, a former colleague named Patricia, who now worked at a firm specializing in financial fraud cases. I explained the situation without names. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I valued about her. "If what you're describing is accurate," she said when I finished, "the exposure is significant. Wire fraud, unauthorized use of business identity, potentially money laundering depending on the source of the original funds. That's what I'm seeing. Do you have the documentation?" "I have 3 years of it," I said. "Organized and sourced." There was a short pause. "Casey, you need an attorney, today." I already had a call scheduled with Daniel's estate attorney for that afternoon. But I also called a second attorney, a woman named Diane Hollis, who had been referred to me by a friend and who specialized in exactly this kind of overlap between estate law and financial crime. She had a direct voice and asked sharp questions and told me to bring everything I had. I went back to Kellerton that afternoon and spent 3 hours photographing every page of the binders and copying every file from the hard drive to an encrypted cloud backup I set up from my own account. Daniel had already digitized most of it. He had been careful. More careful than I had understood until now. When I got home, Ryan was sitting on my front steps. He stood when he saw me, and he smiled the way he always smiled at me, like he was doing me a favor just by showing up. He was wearing a good jacket and carrying a to-go cup of coffee, which was a detail that irritated me for reasons I did not examine too closely. "Hey," he said, "I was hoping to catch you." "Ryan." I stopped at the base of the steps. "What do you need?" "I just wanted to check in, see how you're holding up. And also," he shifted his weight, "I wanted to ask about Daniel's company accounts. His business partner called me, mentioned there were some irregularities, and I thought maybe I could help you navigate that." "You've got enough on your plate." "Who is his business partner?" He blinked. "Theo, you've met him." Theo called you? Not me? Ryan's expression adjusted slightly, just enough for me to see the recalibration. He didn't want to stress you out. He thought I could help translate the business side. I appreciate that, I said, but I have an accountant and an attorney handling the estate. I'm covered. Of course, he smiled again. I just want to make sure nothing gets missed. Daniel was my brother. I want to do right by him. I looked at him for a moment. In 4 years of marriage, I had never been able to tell whether Ryan liked me, tolerated me, or simply factored me in the way a contractor factors weather. Now I was standing on my own front steps, looking at a man who had quietly routed $200,000 through my husband's company, while my husband spent 18 months trying to build a case against him. Thanks for stopping by, I said. He held the smile another second. Then he nodded and walked to his car. That night I sat at the kitchen table and opened a new document. I began a timeline of my own, parallel to Daniel's, starting from the day of his death. Every call from Ryan, every message through Jade. The visit tonight. Each event was small on its own. Together they formed a pattern I recognized from work. He was not grieving. He was managing a situation. He had been managing it since the day Daniel died. I called Diane Hollis the next morning and walked her through everything. She listened with the same focused attention she had used at our first meeting, and then told me 2 things. First, the documentation Daniel had assembled was more than sufficient to initiate a formal complaint with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Second, any attempt by Ryan to access Daniel's business files without my authorization could be treated as interference with an active investigation if we filed quickly. File, I said. Today, she confirmed. There's one more thing, I said. Daniel's younger sister, Jade. Ryan has been using her as a channel. She doesn't know what he's doing. I don't want her caught in this. Diane was quiet for a moment. Then you need to tell her yourself, before this becomes public. That afternoon I called Jade and asked her to come over, not because I was ready, because she deserved to hear it from me and not from a federal filing. She arrived in a sweater and jeans, hair pulled back, looking younger than 22, the way she sometimes did when she was nervous. I made coffee. I set the red binder on the table. I did not lead with accusations. I walked her through it the same way I walk a client through an audit. Slowly, with the numbers in front of us so it was the evidence talking, not me. She did not say anything for a long time after I finished. Then she said, he used Daniel's company to do this. Yes, without Daniel knowing. For at least the first year, Daniel found it and spent the next 18 months documenting it instead of confronting him. Her voice was very quiet. Why didn't Daniel tell me? I think he was trying to protect you from having to choose sides before he knew the full picture. She closed the binder. She stared at the table. I watched her work through it the way you watch someone walk through a dark room. Careful, slow, touching the walls to figure out where everything is. Ryan called me twice yesterday, she said finally. He kept saying you were going to make rash decisions, that you were going to misunderstand something Daniel had set up for the family. He's been doing that since the day of the funeral, I said. She looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. What do you need from me? Something in my chest loosened just slightly. I need you to stop being his channel to me, and I need you to trust that I am not trying to blow up your family. I am trying to do what Daniel spent a year and a half trying to do. She nodded once. Then she pulled her phone out and opened her messages and showed me 2 weeks of texts from Ryan. Some of them were gentle and worried sounding. Some of them were more direct. One said, make sure she doesn't do anything with those business files before we have a chance to look at them. Tell her you want to help manage things together. I photographed every screen. 2 days later, Ryan made his next move. A legal letter arrived by courier from a firm I had not heard of, claiming that a portion of Daniel's business LLC had been established as a joint family enterprise and therefore certain assets were subject to family claim prior to estate distribution. It was not entirely fabricated. It was built on just enough real information to look plausible to someone who did not know the full context. I forwarded it to Diane within 10 minutes. Her response came back in 20. Classic delay tactic. He's trying to cloud the ownership picture before the filing lands. We file tomorrow morning. That night Jade called me. She was at Ryan's house for a family dinner, and she spoke quietly from the bathroom. He's been on the phone all evening. He mentioned your name 3 times. He said something about making sure the narrative is controlled before things get complicated. Okay, I said, thank you. Casey. She paused. I feel sick. I know. He was at the funeral. He hugged me, he cried. I did not say anything to that because there was nothing useful to say. I keep thinking about Daniel sitting in that storage unit, she said, going through all of that alone. He wasn't entirely alone, I said. He left a very good trail. She made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost not. That's so Daniel. The next morning, Diane filed the complaint. By noon, Ryan had been formally notified. By 3 in the afternoon, my phone had received 4 calls from his number, which I did not answer, and 1 from a number I did not recognize, which I also did not answer. There was 1 voicemail. Ryan's voice was calm and measured, the same tone he used when he thought he was the most reasonable person in the room. Casey, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. I want to talk through this before it goes somewhere nobody wants it to go. Daniel was my brother and I am devastated at how this is being characterized. Please call me, we can fix this together. I listened to it once. Then I forwarded it to Diane and deleted it. 2 days after the filing, Diane arranged a meeting at her office. Ryan arrived with his own attorney, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a very good suit. Ryan looked the same as always, composed and slightly above it all, except for a tension around his eyes that I had not seen before. It looked like pressure. It looked, I thought, like someone who had been very certain of something for a long time and was beginning to revise. Jade came with me. She sat beside me at the table and did not look at her brother. Diane opened with a clean, factual summary, the LLC, the transfers, the timeline Daniel had documented, the side accounts, the total amount. When she finished, the room was quiet. Ryan's attorney leaned over and spoke into his ear. Ryan shook his head slightly. This is a mischaracterization, Ryan said. Daniel was aware of the business arrangement. It was a verbal agreement between us. There is no written record of any agreement, Diane said. There are 18 months of Daniel's documentation describing it as unauthorized. There is also a letter in his handwriting filed with the estate court in which he explicitly names the transfers as unauthorized and states that he was building evidence before taking action. He was my brother, Ryan said. His voice shifted just slightly, into something softer, aimed at Jade. He would have come to me. He would have talked to me. He wouldn't have. He didn't come to you, Jade said quietly. It was the first time she had spoken. Because he knew exactly who you were. Ryan went very still. Jade's hands were flat on the table, and her voice was steady in a way that I suspected was costing her more than it looked like. I have your texts, Ryan. Every time you used me to get to Casey. Every time you told me what to say to her and how to say it. You were using me like a tool, and you were doing it while I was still figuring out how to breathe without my brother. The silver-haired attorney said something quietly to Ryan. Ryan held up one hand to stop him. He looked at Jade for a long moment. Then he looked at me. I had thought about what I would feel in this moment. I had expected anger, or satisfaction, or something harder to name. What I actually felt was a specific kind of tiredness. The kind that comes after a long project when the last piece of evidence finally clicks into place and there is nothing left to prove, only things to clean up. What do you want? He asked me. His voice had lost the composure. Not completely, but enough. Diane slid a prepared document across the table. Full repayment of the transferred funds with interest. A formal statement acknowledging unauthorized use of Daniel's business identity. Cooperation with the federal investigation. In return, Casey will not pursue civil damages beyond restitution. And if I don't cooperate with the federal investigation? Then the filing stands as is and proceeds without your cooperation, Diane said pleasantly. Which, given the documentation, will have the same outcome. It will simply be slower and more expensive for you. Ryan's attorney picked up the document. They spent 4 minutes in a quiet conversation I could not fully hear. At one point, Ryan pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. At another point, he looked up at the ceiling. Then he reached for the pen. He signed on 3 separate lines. His attorney signed as witness. The mediator's copy was filed before we left the building. Outside on the sidewalk, the afternoon had turned gray and cold. Jade stood next to me with her hands in her jacket pockets. She was not crying. She looked like someone who had finished something difficult and was still in the first few seconds of realizing it was done. Are you okay? I asked. No, she said, but I will be. We walked to my car. She stopped at the passenger side and looked at me across the roof. Did you know, when you got there that first morning and opened the unit, did you know what you were going to find? No, I said. But I trusted that Daniel left it for a reason. She nodded slowly. He always said you were the sharpest person he knew. He said it all the time. I used to think he was just being a good husband. She paused. He wasn't just being a good husband. I did not answer that. I got in the car. We drove back to the house in quiet that felt different from the quiet of the past 6 weeks. Less like absence. More like the end of something that had needed to end. In the following days, the restitution process began. Diane worked with Ryan's attorney to set up a repayment schedule. The federal filing moved into preliminary review, which meant it was no longer in my hands. Patricia's referral had connected me with an investigator at the FBI field office who called twice a week with brief professional updates. I gave them everything from the hard drive and told them Daniel had done most of the work already. He built a strong case, the investigator said on our second call. The observation was simple and professional, and I had to set the phone down for a moment afterward. Jade came over one evening with takeout and we sat at the kitchen table the way I had sat there with Daniel dozens of times, eating from containers and talking about nothing important and then talking about the important things slowly and without rushing. She told me she had decided to take a leave from school for a semester and figure out what she actually wanted to do. She said Ryan had called her once since the mediation, and she had let it go to voicemail and then deleted it without listening. Is that terrible? She asked. No, I said. It doesn't feel terrible, she said. It just feels quiet. I went back to the storage unit one last time on a Thursday morning in late April. I had notified the facility that I would be clearing it out. I loaded the binders into boxes and carried them to my car alongside the laptop and the hard drive. Some of it would go to Diane's office. Some of it would stay with me. The shelving I left for the facility to deal with. Before I closed the unit for the last time, I stood in the empty space for a minute. The smell of cool air and cardboard was mostly gone. It just smelled like a storage unit now. I thought about Daniel sitting at the folding table with his methodical notes and his careful labels, and his decision to keep building the picture rather than confront his brother on incomplete information. I thought about the sticky note on the laptop telling me where to start. He had done what he always did with hard problems. He had worked it until it was as clear as it could be made, and then he had trusted me to carry it the rest of the way. I locked the unit and returned the key to the front office. On the drive home, Jade called to ask if I wanted to get dinner later. I told her yes. Then I opened the windows and let the April air come through and drove the long way back through the town where Daniel had grown up and where we had built the beginning of something I was still figuring out how to continue without him. The case was not finished. The investigation would take time. Repayment would take longer. There would be hearings and filings and phone calls from Diane that I would take in the parking lot of the grocery store because that was when she always seemed to call. There would be more quiet evenings and more mornings where the shape of the house felt wrong. But the storage unit was cleared out. The documentation was filed. The pattern Daniel had spent 18 months tracing was now visible to the people who could do something about it. I turned onto my street. The trees had come back. The light was long and pale the way it gets in late April when the days are finally stretching out again. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off. The key was still in my coat pocket, the original key from Gerald's office. I had not decided yet what to do with it. Some days it felt like something to keep. Some days it felt like something to let go of. For now I left it where it was and went inside.